Hello and welcome to Holyrood Sources. We're recording on Wednesday the 6th of November. I'm Calum, Macdonald, and also on the podcast, Geoff Aberdein, former Chief of Staff to Alex Salmond when he was First Minister. Hello, Geoff.
Good afternoon.
And Andy Maciver's here, formerly Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Hello, good afternoon.
Great to have you guys. We are recording at about 2:30 on Wednesday afternoon, as opposed to first thing in the morning, because I was up all night reporting on Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential election. More on that to come on the podcast as well. We'll also talk about budgets, a bit of a follow-up really to last week's episode, and the UK government budget and the implications for the Scottish government budget and how things are moving on both fronts. So we'll get to that. But Andy, you are not in your usual place for this recording. In fact, you're on quite an important trip. We'll do more on this in a few weeks.
I'm not in my usual place, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do more on this in a few weeks' time, but I just wanted to start with finding out where you are and what you're up to.
Yes, not in my usual place, not in my usual living room. I'm currently sitting in a hotel in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm here with the Beyond Srebrenica charity, which raises awareness for the Srebrenica genocide and more widely the ethnic cleansing in the Bosnian war as part of the Yugoslav wars in the 90s. It's an incredible place. We talked about doing something this week, didn't we? But then we decided there was actually just too much to talk about from this visit here, and we'll do something separately in future. But it's very interesting actually right now in relation to what happened yesterday, because they're right at the intersection of they've always been at the intersection of an East versus West thing, but here at the moment they have half the country which is effectively part of a federation which supports the Russians, and the other half of the country is very pro-West and very pro-EU. So it's an interesting time for them, worrying time for a lot of them. But as you say, we'll maybe do a little bit more with a special podcast later in the year or next year on all this. Fascinating place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my suggestion would be to listen out for a Christmas special, is what I would say. So yeah, that's where Andy's recording from today, but listen out for more on that in the weeks ahead. There is really only one big story in town today, and of course it involves this man.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. And every citizen, I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve.
That is Donald Trump, who has been, re-elected as President of the United States, although for a not consecutive term. It's only the second time in history that that's happened. At the time of recording, on the afternoon of Wednesday, Donald Trump has 277 votes in the Electoral College. That is 7 more than he needs to win, and there are still 5 states to declare. Kamala Harris has 224 in the Electoral College. And by the way, the numbers on this, I think, are always worth reflecting. Donald Trump at the moment with just over 71.2 million votes, and Kamala Harris with 66.3 million. Geoff, initial reaction from you, first of all, to Donald Trump becoming president again.
Yeah, and it's worth noticing that Donald Trump had, over his career as a businessman, had often suggested he was going to stand for president, but only chose to do so after he had the experience of setting up a business in Aberdeenshire. So I think the Aberdeenshire business community has got a lot to answer for, whether you're in favour of him or not. You know. Second thing, very briefly. I mean, I watched CNN. I think we're all probably quite tired having watched the coverage, but I watched CNN, and I must pay tribute to John King and his magic wall. I just find his analysis fantastic. I found that in the last 2 elections as well, and he does it so brilliant. He doesn't just look at headline rates. He makes sure he goes back and gives us corresponding figures for previous years in the counties and in the states and all the rest of it. And I think that's so important for when you're trying to understand what's happening. But yeah,
why were you not listening to Times Radio, Geoff?
It's a valid question.
I don't believe they have a particularly reliable or credible host.
Andrew Neil was on. What's your point?
Yeah, I think we know who I'm talking about. I'm sorry. I like seeing things, not just listening to things. I think when the exit polls came out, it became quite clear to some of us, that might have been following this quite closely recently, that wasn't looking good. And because the economy was the overarching kind of issue that was emanating, and of course we think of economy and analysts say GDP figures or high headline inflation rates. Actually, what people are saying is, listen, I'm finding this pretty tough just now, and you just kind of felt that. That was going to play into Trump's hands. I would just make one observation. I don't like to get into the meat and drink too much of this, in the sense that I don't think people are listening to us for Andy Maciver and Geoff Aberdain's wonderful knowledge of US politics. But the successful application of politics, wherever you are, requires two vital ingredients, and that is a credible message and a credible messenger. Now, I actually think that a lot of the vast majority of Americans didn't find either candidate particularly credible, but Donald Trump's was already priced in. You saw that coming through in the exit polls. Yeah, we might not particularly care for this guy, but actually I'm going to go with him because the other one, Kamala Harris, is a bit more of an unknown quantity, had to change her position on a lot of issues that she'd taken as recently as 2019. So, for example, like fracking in Pennsylvania to try and hold that vote. And I think there just wasn't that credible profile, platform, reputation for her to build on. And I think that made her start from well behind in this race. But you got to take your hat off to the results are stunning, and it looks like he's going to have the House, the Senate, and of course the popular vote as well as the White House. So it's quite something.
I think that's right. And the scale of this comeback is absolutely astonishing in terms of who he has picked up along the way. Just some numbers for you. First of all, at the time of recording, it looks like he's going to win all the 7 battleground states, which in polling up until election day were 50-50. But some of the groups that he's won: Latino voters under 30. He's picked up loads. Biden had 69% in 2020. Harris has 50% this time out, and Trump has 46% compared to 28% last time around. And that's just one example, Andy, of how he seemingly has built an electoral coalition that has propelled him back to the White House.
Yeah, and he also, at least the last time I looked, which was about an hour ago, he was also leading in white women as well. The things that he has said about women, and he is winning the vote amongst white women. Look, Geoff's right. We are not, there are other people slightly to the west of us over an ocean who might be slightly better qualified to talk about exactly what happened last night. But this is a message. It's not the first message we've had either for Western countries all over the world. Because the voters in these countries, and to a degree, they told us this in July as well. Over 4 million people voted for Nigel Farage. A lot of people, and they're not all bad people. What they are telling us is that what we see as the default common ground, the things we say, the things we ask them to do, the things we tell them to swallow because it's all going to be okay, it's not credible anymore. They don't believe it. That ordinary person who feels disenchanted, who feels detached from power, who's not having a great time in their lives because they're working hard and they still don't have any money. It's just not going far enough. Those people are not responding to what we would I don't think this is necessarily fair, but what we would characterise as that kind of liberal elite message. They're not responding to the message, and they're not responding to the messenger. And the difficulty with that is that you get to a point where somebody can come along with a more nationalist, more populist view, and they can tell you what you want to hear. And you might not like them, you might not think they're great, but they're telling you what they want to hear, and they're giving you a little bit of hope. We think it's false hope, people like us, right? We think it's false hope, but they're giving them hope, and they're saying, well, that's fine, because at least they're giving me something I can grab onto, and the other lot aren't. And we can't blame these people. People who operate in circles like us, we have to blame ourselves. It's not the voters' fault.
Yeah, can I pick up on that? Because Andy, I think you make a really important point. And there was a moment this morning in the analysis, again on CNN, from a guy called Scott Jennings, who's a Republican strategist, a Trump surrogate kind of spokesperson. And he said this, I won't read out the whole quote, but it really struck me as something that applies to all of our politics in Western democracies. We have to figure out how to understand, to talk to listen to the half of the country that rose up tonight and said, we've had enough. He went on to say, we were ignoring the fundamentals. People worrying about what they're going to do to tread water, to keep it, to stay alive in their own livelihoods, be it for their families, their own disposable income, or whatever. And I feel that speaks to a truth in our politics in the UK, in Scotland as well. And Andy mentioned Nigel Farage, and the threat is really there in our politics. You think about it, we've seen it with Reform UK. Now, this is a party with very little party infrastructure. No real agreed core party strategy or narrative, and yet they get 14% of the vote at the general election recently, and they're recording 11% in the most recent Scottish Norstat poll as well. And I get the sense that they're tapping into that sense of malaise that, I'm kind of being forced to think a certain way, and I've always believed that the vast majority of us in democracies are around the centre ground. We like parts of the centre left, we like parts of the centre right. But we don't want to be talked down to, condescended to, and thought that we have to go in a certain direction. It's not to say that we don't agree with a lot of the premises. So let's take, for example, one of my hobby horses, the transition to new energies. We all want to get there. I want to get there and make sure that we deal with the climate crisis. But we've got to do it in a way that doesn't make us feel that our jobs are at risk or significant economic turmoil has to follow. We have to be able to send these messages and deliver the policies that agree it in a consistent way. Let's think about equality. Let's think about the gender debate we've had in this country. Do we all want greater equality for all of our citizens? Yes, we do. Of course we do. We want that. But it's almost that people are being asked to swallow what's been perceived as extremes, and we need to bring more people with us. I do not believe for a second that 71 million people that voted for Donald Trump in America, a place where I've spent a lot of my time, lived there for a period of time, worked there for a period of time, are racist, misogynistic, fascists, that some of the labels that are coming out of that, they're people that are largely in the modern down saying, just give us a bit of a help, guys. And I think we need a bit of a reset, because the alternative is we're going to see results like this potentially in our elections going forward. And I think that's something that Keir Starmer needs to be very aware of, that the new Conservative leader needs to be very aware of, Kemi Badenoch, and of course John Swinney needs to be aware of as well in the Holyrood context.
Can I just add one thing to it? And I'm going to be really exceptionally careful how I phrase it, because I don't want to overstate or overblow, because it's not the same thing. But I'm in a place here in Bosnia which has been subject to just the most incredibly awful, inhumane experience, which resulted effectively from tensions between different ethnicities, different religions, different communities. Now, I'm not, as I say, I'm being really careful. I'm not saying that's where America is or many other countries that are experiencing this rise in populism. But what I am saying is that, Donald Trump in his speech talked about immigration all the time. And there isn't anything wrong with talking about immigration. But we have to make sure, as this sort of populist approach is on the rise, we have to make sure that we don't cross the line here. Because when you start pitting people against other people, and when you start saying that your life is bad actually really because of this other group of people, that is a spectrum. It's a slippery, slippery slope. And as I say, I'm being really careful, because I'm not suggesting that other countries are going to get to the place where Bosnia has incredibly unfortunately been. But we all have to be really careful about how that all takes place. Divergence, difference, debate, these are all really good things. But there is a line. And I think we all would probably agree that on many occasions in his rhetoric, Trump has crossed that line. And, we have a responsibility to just get debate back into the right place.
But isn't that a failure, Andy, in the American context? Is that not a failure of the Democratic Party to be able to enter that space? I think
absolutely.
Absolutely, and it's also a failure of our politicians and political parties. Hey, listen, us to a certain extent for not being able to be able to create the circumstances for a much more pragmatic approach. Because I've always I still maintain the vast majority of us are reasonable people. There are people at the extremes that I'm afraid let the side down, and we won't go and discuss them too much. But I think most people are reasonable, and I think that this is the message from me coming from last night is how do we embark upon a much more transparent, pragmatic, common sense approach that gets us to the destination where I think most people largely agree on by hook or by crook, and doesn't see the rise of kind of some really, let's be honest with you, some really unfortunate rhetoric as well. How do we stave that off from some of our politicians by being more pragmatic ourselves. That would be my...
Yeah, and not just a failure of the Democrats in America, right? A failure of Labour and the Tories here. A failure by Macron, by Schulz, even by the Swedes, the Finns, the Italians.
Yeah.
There are failures everywhere. The world's a very dangerous place just now, and there are failures everywhere, and there are just little fires all over the place. And, you just need to be really, really careful at times like this that it doesn't spread.
Can I add the wisdom of Tim Shipman, who's the Sunday Times chief political commentator, who says, the thing that baffles me is that good and serious people have seen versions of what happened in the US for 8 years and are still surprised that people don't see the world as they do. And I think some of this builds on what we're talking about here. Number one, he says, voters think the economy is, can I afford to live? Not, we are doing better nationally than others. Inflation is politically more important than GDP. Then he goes on to say, immigration matters, both the sense of control and uncontrolled, and the raw numbers, particularly when money is tight. Number three, don't take voters for fools. In this case, don't insist a clearly gaga leader is up to the job, which is a real and valid criticism of the Democrats. They held on to Joe Biden for so long that Harris actually only had, whatever it was, 16 weeks, I think, to kind of define herself in all of this. Number four, don't try to fight a charismatic opponent with someone who can't answer basic questions about why they want to be in charge. So this is another criticism of Harris, is that she was unable on multiple occasions to put any distance between herself and the Biden administration, of which she was a part, but she didn't say that she was materially different to what he was offering. He says, go woke, go politically broke is number five. And number six, what the metro elites regard as an illogical vote is not necessarily illogical for people who are struggling and angry. See previous 5 points. So I think, that's probably building on what you're saying.
Can I just come in on that, Calum?
Yeah.
Had you just read out those points, it would have saved Andy and I just speaking for the last...
Yeah, I know, thanks for that.
Because maybe you should just have Tim Shipman on every week.
Yeah, so what you've effectively just said there, Calum, is you've just said, yeah, thanks, Geoff and Andy, here's what you meant to say. Right, okay.
And he managed to fit it in a tweet.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it's valid though. And these are lessons to learn.
That's essentially, I think, what we're getting at, right through what we discussed so far. And there's a reason he's a very accomplished journalist, and we're no.
Just one more on this to give it a bit of a more of a Scottish flavour as well. I want you to have a little listen to the First Minister John Swinney. Context for this, as reported in the Times, which says he's been rebuked by SNP members for his, quote, folly in backing Kamala Harris before she lost the presidential election. He made what many people are saying was a major diplomatic error by publicly endorsing the current vice president, who obviously has gone on to lose. Here's the First Minister speaking to Gina Davidson from LBC today.
Can I ask you for your reaction to the result of the US election? Are you disappointed? You were a backer of Kamala Harris.
I congratulate President Trump on his election as President of the United States. It's important that we recognise the democratic outcome of that election. Scotland enjoys deep social, economic and cultural ties with the United States, and we will take those forward on the basis of respecting the values of freedom and democracy which underpin Scottish and American society.
Are you not concerned at all then about those relations with the US government as a result of your backing of Kamala Harris? And how would you feel if he waded in come 2026 at the Holyrood elections and supported your opponents, particularly maybe the Reform Party?
What's important is that politicians set out their views when they're asked questions, and I set them out, and that's my view. And it's also important that I respect democracy. So I've done that today in respecting the outcome of the United States election and congratulating President Trump on his election.
Is this a big deal? Is this careless politics? Geoff, what's your analysis?
I don't think it's a big deal. I think it'll be largely forgotten about in the mainstream. There'll be some people that seek to remind them of it. For me, and I'll just give you an honest view here, I don't think it serves anyone real purpose to get too involved in another country's politics in terms of declaring for one or the other. I think it's very dangerous territory. We wouldn't like it if others were doing it to us. But what I would say is, if you're going to kind of do it, best to always start off your your kind of comments by saying, well, clearly the election's a matter for the people of America, and we hope that it's as many people as possible come out in this democratic contest, and then maybe tip the wink with a bit of a line that says, but I hope that democracy is respected and the institutions are respected as part of it. And it might give an indication that you're going for Kamala Harris if you really want to do it. Personally, I'm just not a fan of that stuff. Never have been.
Yeah, Andy?
Totally agree with everything that Geoff has said. I mean, I was going to say it a bit better, but I have nothing to add.
Hang on, Tim Shipman's tweeted about this. Wait a second, I'll just find...
Come on, Tim. You tell us.
Yeah, fair enough. I just wanted you to hear from the First Minister today as a bit of an update on that one. So, and clearly still some results to come in at the time of recording, but Donald Trump will be the next President of the United States. Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.